talking about the bad news. And the fact is that the news is bad. And I'm not talking about the individual events in the news. I'm talking about the news, entertainment, media industry itself. I have reached this rather depressing conclusion after a number of years of being a news junkie, someone who's always kept up to date and tried to understand as much of it as I can. And I've got a little short video post, which is going to be following this short introduction, which I hope you'll listen to. I hope you'll watch it and let me know what you think about my opinions at the end. Just post down below. My father told me many years ago that it was a good thing to listen to the BBC News, and I did this every morning with my little battery-operated radio, thinking that it would give me the global outlook that was necessary for a young man who was about to make his way in the world. And then I found in school this was further reinforced with the free broadsheet newspapers in the Sixth Form Centre. And like many people, news became part of my daily life and I felt virtuous for it. And I've kept up the habit ever since. And it all started with that small radio. But now I take it digitally through newspaper subscriptions, YouTube and various other social media feeds. The supply and the choice of my drug is absolutely endless. But recently I'm beginning to think that I may have overdosed. Is it actually possible to have too much of a good thing? Well, maybe the news isn't just as wholesome as what I think it is. In fact, I'm coming to the conclusion that it's the trans fat of entertainment and it's slowly clogging up my neural pathways. All those years ago, probably when I was about sort of 10, 11, 12 and maybe in my early teens, I remember the gravitas of the newsreader as he intoned the headlines between the bongs of Big Ben, and my British listeners will know what I'm talking about. Today though, I think it's nothing more than hysterical sewage which is sprayed over us, all with the purpose of provoking a reaction. Now every country is going to have its own version of the story that I'm probably going to tell you, and it all goes down to how things have changed and the events that have punctuated our lives. For us in the UK, we had these seismic events. And examples of this are the Scottish and the European Union referenda. Then we had COVID-19, and then we had things like Afghanistan in the news from America, and then there's implications of this war in Ukraine. There has always been something to entertain and to distract. And this news coverage that we've all seen, it's relentless, it's breathless. Everybody is riled up, and in every single case there's a common enemy. And depending on what your outlet of choice is, it differs, but there is always an enemy. And the news outlets, they point and they shriek. It could be nationalists, it could be Brexiteers, it could be anti-vaxxers, and latterly it's been the Russians. Now we are being manipulated and intimidated and gaslit from morning to night. And my wider frustration is that it's actually a free press who is supposed to hold the various institutions to account. But now the news just operates as their PR department. Back in the day, I think that the news used to offer mostly facts and some editorial perspectives, and it was up to the reader or the listener to interpret what they wanted from it. Now, of course, there's always been propaganda in the news over the years, but I do think that a long number of years ago, the form was longer and people were more open to discussing nuance. Now, not anymore. Now, there are two sides to every story, although while you will pay this lip service, you probably don't really realise that you're only ever getting one editorial perspective. If they do show you two sides, by implication one is bad, the other is better. And we can usefully, I think, break the news down into two broad categories. You've got your mainstream media and you've got your alternative media. For the first, only one opinion is allowed, and that is of the received orthodoxy pronounced by the high priests of the ruling class, and it is communicated to you through the state organs, and that could be the BBC, ABC, or whatever your national tax-funded institution is that provides news. Now, the majority of the country probably gets their news opinions from here or sources very similar to that. The alternative news, at least I think it provides an antidote, and it often has a greater variety of in-depth reporting. And the alternative news, of course, is derided by the Ancien regime, I think because the alternative news is more interested in truth and challenging the narrative. The most obvious example of this was around COVID. On the mainstream media, absolutely no dissent was tolerated, And anyone who did dispute anything they heard there soon found themselves deplatformed or labelled a conspiracist and blocked from sharing their opinions more widely. I find it really fascinating that during COVID times, depending on who you talk to, it was like we were living in two parallel universes. The older members of my family, for example, who only ever watched the mainstream media, were scared to death to leave the house during COVID. And then there was the other group, especially among the young, the curious, and maybe the contrarians a little bit like myself, who were interested in speakers offering a different view on things. I have found it fascinating that the anti-establishment and the alternative media have sometimes proved closer to the mark more of the time than the impeachable mainstream media. But you will never know it, as this is always suppressed, and if it does force its way out, the same people who said one thing will shamelessly report the exact opposite, as if what they originally said never happened. And this is why I think we're seeing what I call the Cassandra complex. It's a situation where accurate predictions are made by one person or a group, but nobody believes them. And after they prove to be true, nobody remembers that the warnings were issued. Honestly though, I think it matters little in this case who is right or wrong, and I'm not here to argue for the merits of one news source over another. Instead, I want to remind you that we are the fuel. We are the ones being consumed by the news. It is stealing our precious moments from our lives, from our children, our spouses, and our friends. Even long after we have read the article or seen the news clip, we remained unsettled, angry, and annoyed. How else was it that Donald Trump was able to live rent-free in people's heads for the last 6 years if it wasn't for the mainstream media's daily briefings against them? CNN, as you will know, is and was a huge critic of him. And I find it really fascinating that whenever he left office, their ratings numbers collapsed, and as a way to try and keep their numbers up, they would continue hitting on Donald Trump. And they, like many others over the last number of years, I think have provided a 1984 style 2 minutes of hit, which tapped into our basest instincts. Now, in the moment, of course, it feels great to hit on whatever the object of hate is, be it Donald Trump or whatever. But who is this hit more corrosive for? In the case of Donald Trump, you or him? He didn't care. In fact, he probably relished it. Yet some poor sucker probably took an aneurysm every time Brian Stelter or Don Lemon railed against the poor old orange man. And the advertising revenue rolled in. Some people got rich, the rest got deranged. So we have a decision to make based on this knowledge that the news media is not your friend. Do not take any of their claims of impartiality at face value. Each one of them has an agenda which is around money, who is paying for them or who will pay them. This is not a public service for our good. The most important point is that by getting us into a highly charged state, the population is more controllable. We are paralysed by fear, or alternatively we squabble among ourselves and we cannot see the wider picture. We are being hacked by the algorithm. Do you remember when that time when we all hid back in our houses at the start of COVID, the biggest wealth transfer occurred from the middle class to the very rich. Also during this time, the US printed more money in 2020 than it did for over 200 years. 2021 and 2022 weren't much better, and our leaders didn't even follow their own rules. And when Canadians protested the continued loss of their civil liberties, some had their bank accounts frozen by a Western Liberal government. Let that sink in. A Western Liberal government freezing bank accounts of its citizens. This is a worrying precedent that I don't think has yet run its course. Ordinary people are being weaponized against each other, and almost it's creating this artificial intelligence Karen hive mind. We fall into two camps. Either the majority of the scared witless by the mainstream TV into enforcing the orthodoxy, or a slightly smaller group that is driven wild by the lies and the audacity of it all. It is a zero-sum game. We are all losing. And I challenge you to think of this. Can you list any way in the last 5 years that you or your family's life was made in any way better by anything you read, saw, or heard in the news? I'm a news junkie. I can't think even of a single thing. At some level, I rationalise that we are being lied to deliberately create an effect. On a number of occasions, I've been involved in newsworthy incidents. I saw the events unfold, I saw why they happened, I saw how they happened, only to see it reported on TV with factual inaccuracies, often with a curious slant. Now, invariably towards the end, they'll bring on a talking head agitator who gives his opinion. And it's always heavily biased, and this further skews us from the truth. I rationalise that if you can't even trust the local media to report the news story accurately, what makes us so sure that we can trust the media with with events of global import? On a recent post that I made on my blog, I've talked about smartphone addiction. And as I think about this subject more deeply, actually what I've realised, it's not the phone that I'm addicted to or the hardware, but it's the news feed and the feelings that it evokes within me. Anger, frustration, sanctimony, all negative emotions. But at least at the moment, I'm feeling something. And it's distracting me perhaps from the boredom or being locked in my house or chained to my desk. I'm exactly how they want me to be. At times, anxious, atomised, waiting with bated breath to find out what some authority figure is going to do to fix the problem that they have presented to me. Now, it's fairly obvious. This is no way to live. We were not built to live a paralysing life of fear. We were created for action, for movement, for community, to take on the enormous challenges of life. This is the antidote to the news media's fear-mongering: action. Something serious is coming, and we need to get focused. We can't afford to be distracted. In the West, we have been comfortably insulated for the last 80 years, and we have lived in a golden era. Now, I hope I'm wrong about this and I haven't been watching too much news to give me this impression, but I think things are going to take a sharp turn for the worse. We have built up a financial, moral, and spiritual debt. The news and the media are distracting us from what is coming. Worse yet, I would say, they are nudging us along a path. We are misinformed, we are entrenched, and we are miserable. Don't forget the immutable law: all debts must eventually be paid. And we don't know when the bailiff is going to come, but he is going to come, and it's going to hurt when he does. The good news is that you don't need the news to tell you that you need to get your own house in order. I encourage you to stop fighting shadows on your keyboard and to quit thinking of sharp Twitter riposts to people that you neither know nor care about as you're driving to or from work in your car. The battle belongs at home. The battle is in your mind, and you do not need unnecessary resistance of wading through the mental flotsam of a world in crisis. I encourage you to turn the news feed off and focus your mind on what you can control. We need an alternative approach. And even interesting, I was reading something, but someone else who's done this recently had even said that the cognitive errors they found were reduced in their life as they cut the news out. And I also think as well, Paul in the Bible laterally points us in the right direction. He said, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." And that's in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Now, this sounds kind of maybe rather trite advice. Think, nice, pleasant thoughts. But actually, this is much, much harder and more serious than what it sounds. And the reason for this is that you will not get that immediate emotional feedback that you get whenever you look at your social media or you scroll up the various news feeds. But this renewing of your thinking, it's hard work, but it will equip you and give you a mental agility and a toughness to face even the worst disaster scenes that any news organisation could serve up to you. But maybe on a slightly more positive note, maybe you won't even have to face any disaster. What if you just readjusted your focus? How much more tolerable might your life be? So my parting shot to you is, don't go looking for the news. If you need to know the news, it will find you.